This is the LG 34GS95QE monitor, and it's the first LG monitor that I've reviewed on the channel. Now, I've seen a lot of good things about LG monitors, and honestly, I've had a handful on my list to review for roughly 5 years now, but they typically are more expensive than the other monitors I review with similar specs, and by the time the LG monitor goes on sale, the industry has moved on, so it just never quite makes sense for me to actually review the monitor. This one definitely felt different though, because this has been out for just a hair over a year, and with a discount it brought it down to a price point that definitely feels more competitive to other monitors with similar specs. Now for this review, I'm going to follow the same layout that I do with all of my reviews, where I'm going to get into the specs first, then we're going to get into the in-panel settings. I'll look at my test results with this. I'll showcase what this can do with consoles, this being an ultra wide. I'm going to cover that. It's a little bit different than a normal 16:9 aspect ratio monitor, but I will talk about that. And then I'll get into what I like, potentially don't like, in the gray area before wrapping the video up. With that being said, let's get into the specs. The LG 34GS95QE is a 34-inch OLED with a 3440 by 1440p resolution, an 800R curve, and a 240Hz refresh rate at a 1 millisecond gray-to-gray response time. This has a typical brightness of 275 nits and a peak brightness of 570 nits in a 2% window from what I've seen tested. This has true 10-bit color. This is VESA certified for display HDR True Black 400, so you know you are getting the minimum 400 nits with that. And this covers 98.5% of the DCI-P3 color gamut. This also has FreeSync Premium Pro, and this is officially certified for G-Sync compatibility. This has a 1.5 million to 1 contrast ratio, 110 pixels per inch, and this has a matte anti-glare surface coating. 4 ports, this has one DP 1.4, 2 HDMI 2.1, 2 USB 3.2 Gen 1 expansion ports, and a headphone jack that has DTS Headphone X. For physical adjustments, this can raise and lower 120 millimeters. This can swivel to the left and right 10 degrees. This can tilt 10 degrees forwards and 15 degrees backwards, and although they don't have it listed, this can pan a couple of degrees in either direction. This has a 100mm by 100mm pattern if you wanted to mount this though, and in terms of the aesthetics, this is a very clean overall look with no logos all over the place or patterns or anything like that in the molding. There's just some RGB lighting on the back. Inside of the box, you will get the monitor, arm, base, and then a box with all of the accessories in it, which has the DP cable, HDMI cable, USB expansion cable, power brick with the power cable, and then the user manual / warranty card. For the warranty on this is a year less than most OLEDs on the market, coming in at 2 years and not 3. And last here we have the price. This was originally $1,300. On sale right now, you can find the black version for $850, and then they also have a white version with this, and that one comes in at $800. When I found mine on sale, I got it for $770, so maybe here soon we may see this with some even better pricing. Not quite sure with everything that's going on with all of the tariffs, unfortunately, so that may go in the opposite direction, but currently as of the writing and recording of this video, it's $800 or $850 depending on which version you get. Next, let's get into the panel menu and the various settings you will find there. The menu button is a single button on the bottom backside of the monitor in the middle. Clicking this in once will bring up the quick access menu, where you will find power at the top. On the left and right hand side, you have the user defined keys. You can change this within the general settings tab if you want. And then you have exit on the bottom and then settings directly in the center. The overall design here is interesting because it's more streamlined and clean looking compared to almost all of the other panel menus that I've used. It almost looks more like a TV menu more so than a monitor menu. For the main setting tabs though, you have game adjust, picture adjust, sound, input, and general. At the top, you have a quick snapshot of certain settings that you have applied. Starting with the Game Adjust tab, you have Game Mode, which is basically picture presets. You have Adaptive Sync, Black Stabilizer, Crosshair, FPS Counter, and Game Reset. For Game Mode, you have Gamer 1, Gamer 2, FPS, RTS, Vivid, Reader, HDR Effect, sRGB, Color Weakness, and Calibration 1 and Calibration 2. Gamer 1 and 2 will allow you to adjust certain settings like sharpness, gamma, and color values that the other presets won't allow you to do. Gamer 1 will allow you to adjust the RGB color values, while Gamer 2 will not. Certain presets like Reader won't allow you to adjust the black equalizer, so keep that in mind. And the HDR effect is for boosting contrast and colors in content that isn't natively HDR to simulate what it would look like if it was actually true HDR. But keep in mind, this isn't actually HDR, it's just simulating that look. Calibration 1 and 2 are the most interesting presets here because you can download the LG Calibration Studio and you can adjust the brightness, color temperature, and gamma. You can also use the many gamut presets as a starting point, but in order to do any of this, you actually need a color calibration tool, which most gamers just won't have. Now, I won't cover this in extreme detail right now. I do want to showcase at least what the software looks like and some of the changes that you can make. But I do think that this is pretty amazing, and it's the first monitor I've used with this feature. I think the drawback is not everyone's going to have a color calibration tool, and they aren't cheap. If you do have one though, this is pretty awesome to tinker around with. The process is a little bit longer, so be prepared to wait potentially 15 to 20 plus minutes to actually let this run through its full cycle once you make the adjustments that you want. But with this, I do find it's a lot of customization that you're not going to get with just the regular in-panel settings. So if you have a color calibration tool and some time, then you can take the visuals on this monitor that already look amazing out of the box to the next level. One thing I found interesting here though was it says peak nits is over 1,000, just a little over 1,000, and the info I found online from a handful of different content creators showed that this was roughly 570 nits for the peak brightness. Now, I don't have the right tool to test and confirm this, but I'm assuming with this, if it is hitting over 1,000 nits, it'll be in at least a 2% window, if not smaller. The panel menu confirms this though, as it lists some of the info on the side when you actually choose the calibration 1 or 2 that you've adjusted in the picture presets. Now for HDR, once you enable that in Windows, you will only be able to adjust Game 1, Game 2, FPS, RTS, and Vivid for the picture presets. The rest will be unavailable, and this also applies to SDR as well if you enable Adaptive Sync. So with Adaptive Sync turned on, you won't have access to Reader, HDR Effect, sRGB, Color Weakness, Calibration 1, and Calibration 2. So there are some limitations to the picture presets depending on having Adaptive Sync or HDR turned on, so keep that in mind. The rest of the picture settings in the Game Mode tab are pretty straightforward, so let's go ahead and move on to the Picture Adjust tab. There you have brightness, peak brightness, contrast, sharpness, gamma, color temperature, RGB, 6 color, black level, and picture reset. For peak brightness, you have high, low, and off. This won't look as apparent on camera here, but in person it is very noticeable between these three options. For gamma, you have 4 modes. They don't list the number, which I find interesting. They do with the Calibration Studio, but in the panel menu, they do not. So you have mode 1, 2, 3, and 4 here. For color temperature, you have custom, warm, medium, cool, and manual. Manual is interesting because when you click on this, you can scale and it says C and W, so cool and warm. And then you have a slider that goes up to 10 for either cool or warm, which is a good amount of control. For the RGB, you can adjust the RGB values. For 6 color, you can take those RGB colors and then adjust the saturation and hue of those. Next is the sound tab. Now these don't have built-in speakers, but this does have the DTS Headphone X with it. Here you have game, entertainment, sports, and off. So if you plug in a headset directly into the monitor, you have these different modes that you can use, and they sound really good. It's rare that I would prefer to plug my headset into a monitor just because I have my nicer speakers and there's not really going to be a sound difference between the two, but with this there actually is, and it does sound really good with all of the modes. Next is the input tab. Here you will find input select, aspect ratio, auto input switch, picture by picture / picture in picture, and then you have the picture in picture size and picture in picture position. For aspect ratio, you have full wide, original, just scan, and then Cinema 1 and Cinema 2. I'll cover these again in a little bit when I get to consoles. For picture by picture and picture in picture, pretty straightforward. You can enable these right here. For the picture in picture size, you have 2 options, small and large. And then the position, you can change those to the 4 corners of the monitor. This mode definitely makes more sense on an ultra wide compared to a regular 16:9 aspect ratio monitor, and the picture by picture may be useful here if you're wanting to do consoles with PC. It doesn't quite make as much sense compared to a 49-inch super ultra wide, for instance, which actually is going to display 2 essentially 27-inch 16:9 aspect ratio monitors side by side. Here, because it's not that big, it will condense the image a little bit, so it will essentially look kind of like scrunched in. So I don't know how well that will play out for consoles, but I will come back to that here in a little bit. And last, you have the general tab. Here you will find language, OLED screen move, OLED screen saver, OLED image cleaning, hexagon lighting, user defined key 1, user defined key 2, smart energy saving, deep sleep mode, automatic standby, and then the input compatibility version, where here you can enable DSC, and that will be important. I'm going to talk about that here in a minute. And then you have buzzer. This makes a noise when you actually change things in the menu. You can turn that off. And at the very bottom, I didn't take an image of this, but you have just system information, reset all, things like that. Going back to the OLED care features though, this is where this will show its age a little bit. You don't have a ton of options. So we have the screen move, which is nice. You have 3 different modes or off. That's just shifting the screen essentially in certain intervals so that you can avoid any type of image retention. Some of the features you will find on newer OLED panels though are things like screen dimming control, outer dimming control, global dimming control. You can have logo detection, taskbar detection, things like that this just doesn't have. It does have a screensaver, which is nice. So it's going to turn this off if it's been on for a certain period. You don't get to adjust that, which I find odd. So you can't choose the time interval. That would have been nice. But you can tell your monitor to turn off from the Windows settings in specific time intervals. So there is a workaround if you didn't want to use this. And then of course we have the OLED image cleaning. So this is going to be standard across any OLED monitor. This just cleans any of the pixels. So if there's anything that's stuck or anything like that, it just does a refresh on all of that to make sure again that we don't have any type of image retention so we can prevent burn-in. Next you have hexagon lighting. This is for the lighting on the back. You have 4 static presets. If you click on one of these, you have 21 different color options to choose from. Outside of that, you just have cycling where it will do a color cycle, and then you can turn this off. And then we have the user defined key 1 and 2. This is a part of the quick access menu that I mentioned earlier. So this is when you click in the menu button on the left and right, you have those 2 options. Here is where you would actually change those. For the potential options, you have input, game mode, OLED image cleaning, picture by picture / picture in picture, DTS headphone X, crosshair, black stabilizer, FPS counter, and hexagon lighting. And last, for the general settings here, I want to look at the display stream compression. So this does not have a DP 2.1. So with DP 1.4, if you turn off DSC, you can only do up to 144 Hertz. If you do turn on that display stream compression, that's how you can get the full 240 Hertz at the 1440p resolution. Now, some people swear that they can tell the difference between when you are using DSC and when you're not. I don't visually notice any difference, but for those that are worried about that, I would say use HDMI 2.1, because with that, you can actually do uncompressed 1440p 240 Hertz on this. So for anybody that's on PC where you do not want DSC at all, HDMI 2.1 is going to be your better option over DP 1.4. It is interesting though that you can do 4K with that resolution. What it does is it essentially like crunches everything down though, so it's not a usable resolution. But I do think it was interesting that with HDMI it gave me the option for essentially 16:9 4K here. Shifting over now to my test results, starting with the on-screen response time testing tool. Here, this thing is fast. It's an OLED. So we have the perceived response time, and then we have the RGB overshoot and visual response rating, which is taking the perceived response time and RGB overshoot and then averaging those out and then essentially grading it all the way up to 100. This is 95.8 across the board. It's the most uniform one that I've seen in terms of results with that. And that kind of runs right in the middle in terms of other monitors that I've tested with this tool. I've seen like 93 as a low and then 97, 98 as a high. So it's kind of right there in the middle. Looking at the average complete time though, and that is going to be for a black to white transition, it is 1.62 milliseconds. The 02550, so that's black to white to black, is 2.4. The best here was 0.7. The worst was the 1.6. And although I'm not getting 0.03 milliseconds with any of the results here, I don't get that with any of the OLEDs that I test, and they all claim the same thing. And one of the reasons why I think that is going on is because they most likely have a far superior testing tool than I have that I just wouldn't be able to afford. And they're also looking at specifically gray to gray, where I'm trying to showcase really a bunch of different transitions. They're probably picking out the fastest one that they can find here. I'm looking at other transitions like the average complete time, that average time that you're seeing that go from black to white, or even black to white and then back to black again. Anything here sub 1 millisecond is going to be extremely fast across the board. And really beyond this, I want to look at a UFO test. Even though I don't have a trail pursuit camera, just looking at that visually, you can see that there's no ghosting. And confirming with the test results here for the RGB overshoot, there's no inverse ghosting as well. So this panel is extremely fast, as all the OLED panels that I've tested have been. And I'm looking at, I want to just add more results to what they're claiming with my testing tool. But then I also want to visually look at the UFO test and just see, am I noticing anything here? And I'm not. It's just literally the UFO cleanly going across the screen. Again, no ghosting or inverse ghosting. All you would notice would be like transitionary frames. And all of this is going to translate to gaming because you're going to have an extremely smooth gaming experience across the board. And last, we have the results from the Spider X color calibration tool. One, I want to confirm their claimed 98.5% of the DCI-P3 color gamut, and then showcase other color gamuts as well. And with this, I tested the Gamer 1 and sRGB picture presets. Typically what you'll find is a lot of them are just identical in terms of the color gamut, and then when you get to an sRGB mode, it will be less. Here, they were basically all the same. If you get into certain ones like Reader, it's going to be way off just because that is tuned towards a very specific look. But for anybody that is using Gamer 1, Gamer 2, Vivid, things like that, you're going to have these color gamuts. So we have 100% coverage of the sRGB, 91% of the Adobe RGB, 97% of the DCI-P3. So we don't quite get that 98.5% there. And then we have 89% of the NTSC. For the sRGB picture preset, here we're going to see typically a difference, and it can be large with some of these. We have 99% of the sRGB color gamut coverage, 74% of the Adobe RGB, down from 91%, 74% of the DCI-P3, down from 97%, and then we have 69% for the NTSC, down from 89%. So unless you need that for a very specific reason, usually that's somebody that's working in Photoshop and they have to edit in that color space, for the most part, if you're a gamer, you're going to want to use one of the other picture presets and not the sRGB one, because it will look more vibrant with the other ones compared to this. Shifting over now to consoles and what you can do with those. I'm just really going to showcase the PlayStation 5 here. Here, this will upscale to 4K if you do the native 16:9 aspect ratio. You do get variable refresh rate, and this is with HDR as well. So here you can see the different refresh rates that you would have access to for 4K, 1440p, and 1080p. The only thing that you will not get here is the auto low latency mode. For the Xbox Series X, this will be the same thing. You get the upscaling to 4K, you get 1440p, you get 1080p, and then you get the various refresh rates within that and VRR. So you're covered with this aspect ratio. Now, this is a preference thing. You can allow this to stretch out the image and it will display that, but it looks stretched out. And my camera here isn't going to do it justice. In person, it looks far more stretched out than the footage I'm going to show. And so I do want to showcase the various options that you have for aspect ratio. This is stretched out. That would have been the regular 21:9. This is going to be the 16:9. The just scan essentially is going to figure out, hey, what should I do when it's 21:9? Then you have Cinema 1 and Cinema 2. These are interesting because it's actually zooming in, and it's as if it actually takes that 16:9 and kind of makes it fit, basically. It doesn't look stretched out anymore. It looks more like it should, just on a larger screen, but you are cutting off the top and bottom. And that's going to make sense for watching a movie on this 21:9 aspect ratio, where you have black bars potentially, and now you can, like, hey, just fit it to the screen and it should look better. Now, I do like the options here, and this does make it so you can easily change to the visual style that you want. Do you want this more zoomed in, like with Cinema 1 here? I actually like this. I could see myself using this mode, but then you can see on the bottom, you're actually starting to cut off some of the UI that you have on screen. So that may be problematic for some people. And if you do Cinema 2, it zooms in even further. It does look maybe a little bit better because it kind of evens everything out, but you are losing a lot of the user interface. I think the main takeaway here is you do have options when it comes to the aspect ratio through the panel, which I do like, but when it comes to consoles, there are some limitations that you are running into. And so if you just played console, I wouldn't get an ultra wide, period. But if you're a PC player that does play console as well, and you're wondering if you can use it with this, you can, and there's some options that will make this a better experience for you, but there are some drawbacks to those options. So now that I've covered these specs, in-panel settings, my test results, and what you can do with consoles, let's get into what I like about this monitor, starting with the performance and the visuals. This being an OLED panel, it delivers. So here you're getting the incredibly vibrant colors that you have with OLEDs, and then those infinite black levels. So when you go from playing on a VA panel or an IPS panel over to an OLED, one of the first things you're going to notice, outside of how fast it is those infinite black levels, where you are getting more of a true black compared to any type of panel glow that may come with a VA or an IPS panel. This adds to the overall richness in those visuals that you get with OLEDs in general, which is why they're so popular right now. Out of the box, the monitor looks great because of the fact that it is an OLED, but LG doesn't skimp on the in-panel settings with this either. There are a ton of customization options available through the in-panel menu for both SDR and HDR. And both of these can look incredibly vibrant and natural. I like the fact that you can actually adjust HDR a lot more than other panels that I've used, where you kind of are locked into maybe a couple different settings that you can adjust, or just basically presets. You get the option of like 2 or 3 presets, but little to no adjustments. Here you get more adjustments, and I do appreciate that. Add to that the fact that you can actually go even deeper with calibration if you have a calibration tool with the LG Calibration Studio, which opens up a whole level of fine-tuning with this. But one thing I do want to mention that I didn't earlier is if you have one of these tools, usually the software associated with that tool has similar options. So with my Spider X, I can use that software to adjust the settings for the monitor. What I like is the fact that it is LG's specific to their LG panel. So I think you do, one, get a little bit more in terms of options potentially specific to the panel, but I like the fact that it is just all wrapped together and it's not this separate software that I'm using that is Spider X, and then I'm going to overlay that on top of the monitor. Again, I'm just using something that's a little bit more integrated with the monitor that I have in front of me. So the visuals here get an A+. If you've noticed, I am making sure that with all the gameplay footage here, I am labeling whether or not it is SDR or HDR, and I'm trying to show a vast array of different games so that you get a decent idea of what this will look like in person. Just keep in mind I'm recording this, so in person this will look even better. Now with this being an OLED, you also get the ultra fast response time, which means no ghosting, inverse ghosting, or black smearing. So gameplay stays razor sharp even during chaotic movement. You combine that with the 240 Hz refresh rate and you're getting an incredibly smooth and responsive experience that's ideal for competitive or fast-paced gaming. Just keep in mind you're gonna need a beefy GPU that can actually drive that kind of performance. And even with a beefy GPU, keep in mind in most AAA games, you're not gonna hit 240 Hz. Now that does depend on the game. Like for instance, Doom Eternal, I can actually get pretty close to the 240 Hz without turning the settings all the way down to low. But if I shift over to a game like Destiny 2, I'm really getting like 120 to 180 Hz, depending on how much is going on screen and of course my settings. But I am also mindful of the fact that I am future-proofing to a degree here, because as I get newer GPUs and my performance does increase, I will get closer and closer to that 240 Hz. Now I know for some competitive players, they will actually drop the resolution, or they will actually just go into a 16:9 aspect ratio if they want to increase overall performance and squeeze out a couple more frames. And although this isn't something I personally test, I have seen videos where other users have said that as they've dropped the resolution, or again brought this into a 16:9, they didn't lose any accuracy with the monitor, which can happen as you go from a higher resolution to a lower one. Next, the 800R curve here is well executed. It sounds dramatic when you just hear 800R, but once you're actually sitting in front of it, the wraparound feel really pulls you more into the content without actually introducing any type of edge distortion, color banding, or text pixelation, at least from my experience with this. I can't imagine having any more curve than this. I do think that this is the limit. So when Samsung came out with the G7 and then the G5 and they had that 1000R curve, that was pretty dramatic. And I know a lot of people really like those monitors. Here we're going from 1000 down to 800. So you actually have more curve than that. But again, I think it is the limit of what you can do curve-wise before it would just feel weird, because it would be so curved. It's just not going to make sense visually to look at any content on it, because it will at that point most likely start to bend everything, and that's where you're going to get edge distortion and things like that. And I do think for a lot of people, this is going to be one of the big draws towards this monitor, is because it has a more extreme curve than any other monitor that I know out on the market. I don't know too many that actually have an 800R curve or anything that's really close. We have a handful that have 1000, but nothing's coming to mind that's like, oh, that's another monitor that has an 800R curve. And if you are one of those people and you're wondering, hey, how does this actually look in person? I think it is awesome, especially when you're gaming and it just feels more immersive because of the curve versus being flat. Now, while this doesn't have any built-in speakers, the DTS Headphone X here is really good. This is a nice touch. It actually sounds really good in terms of the difference that you have between the audio profiles. It's not just like a subtle change. You do notice the difference between these different options. And typically I don't actually plug anything into a monitor in terms of like the headphone jack. I have my Logitech speakers that I use and I just plug into that, and then I have more adjustments that I can do in the software. I don't want to plug into the monitor when I have more options through the Logitech software, but for some people they may plug into the monitor and then they have their own software that they use to create different sound profiles or anything like that to adjust the audio. Here, because it's already been calibrated and all that, you don't need to mess with software, so it offers a much easier user-friendly experience. Plug it in, change to the audio profile that you want, and then you're good to go. And last here, I really like the overall design with this that LG went with because it's very clean and minimal. There's no big LG branding plastered all over it. You're not getting any like lines or anything really in the molding. It's just clean and simple with the RGB lighting on the back as an accent. So it adds a little bit of style to this without turning it into a big distraction. And then on top of that, everything really feels premium with this build and this molding here. Shifting over now to what I don't like about this monitor, I only have one thing, but it is a big one, and it is going to be text clarity. Couple things at play here. One is this is a 1440p monitor, so it does have a lower resolution, so you are dealing with some pixelation when it comes to this. It just doesn't have the higher pixel density of a 4K monitor, for instance. But the bigger thing here is the text fringing, because out of all of the OLEDs that I've tested, this is definitely the most noticeable. So if your workflow involves a lot of reading, writing, coding, or spreadsheet work, this probably isn't ideal. Now, the extra screen real estate is definitely a plus with this, especially in certain apps like Premiere Pro, where you have timelines and tools and panels and things like that, where you do get to fit more on screen, but it all feels like a little bit of a trade-off now. So you're getting all of that extra space, but you're compromising text clarity, which makes it feel like you're getting the extra space, but with a little bit of a catch. Now, I don't think this is necessarily a deal breaker, especially if you're using this more for media and gaming. But if you're going to compare this to some of the newer OLED models with updated subpixel layouts, the hard part here is those are actually starting to get close in price to this same monitor, even though it's discounted. So it makes it a tougher call if you're going to go with this one, or if you're going to look for those other ones where, again, the price is starting to get pretty close to this one with this discount even, but it has a newer panel and it actually has less or close to zero text fringing. And again, I don't think that this is a deal breaker. It depends on what you're primarily going to be using this monitor for, but I do think it is something to think about, and also something to take this information and compare it to those other ones and then just see price-wise, where does this land for you? The good news is that is going to be it for the negatives here. Shifting over now to the gray area. These are things you may or may not care about. And I'm going to start here with OLED Care features, because in the last 2 years, we've really seen these things expanded. It used to just be a pixel cleaning and like a screensaver, which is really what you find on this monitor. We're looking really at, I think, a Gen 1 with this. When you start to get into like Gen 3 and 4, you see a lot of things expanded here. So now you're not only getting the updated subpixel layouts, but you're also getting a lot of features that just help mitigate any type of burn-in, which is everybody's fear when it comes to OLEDs. And some examples of these new features: you're going to have things like screen dimming control, outer dimming control, global dimming control, logo detection, taskbar detection, boundary detection. You have proximity sensors now. This also doesn't have, with this monitor, any anti-flicker settings, which with new ones, you get anti-flicker. They even have like updated versions of that now, like on the ROG OLEDs, the ones that came out in the last like 6 months, they have the anti-flicker 2.0. With those, you do reduce any type of OLED flicker a good amount. Here, you don't have any of that. So I have noticed flickering with this monitor more than any of the other OLEDs that I've reviewed. That is primarily with menus. So as I load into a game, as the main title screen comes on, I will notice it there. And then as I'm in a menu, I may notice it. If you're playing an extremely dark game, you may notice it in certain areas. Outside of that, I typically don't notice any type of flickering, but it is there. And in those certain occasions, it may be something that annoys you. Next, for consoles, I didn't want to necessarily put this in the good section here. I didn't know where to put it because you can go with some options here. And I do like the fact that they have easier changes that you can make to this that make this suitable for consoles compared to other ultra wides that I've used. For instance, just changing this really quickly over to 16:9. Now you have the black bars on the side, but you can use this in that aspect ratio versus letting it just stretch the image out and then playing in the 21:9 with consoles. I don't like that. The stretched image to me just doesn't look really good. but it's still a trade out. So you can have a stretched image or you can have black bars on the side. So again, if you just play consoles, this is not ideal for consoles. But if you're a PC player that does have a console that you occasionally use, I think you can get by with either letting this stretch out the image or having the black bars on the side. And it's just kind of a minor annoyance for you. It just depends on your preference there. I would even scale in certain games if you're not worried about the user interface, where you could kind of have it zoom in a little bit, where you're dealing with those other aspect ratios. I think the Cinema 1 and Cinema 2 there, right? Like it kind of zoomed in, but still made it fit. So it didn't stretch out the image. So it looked a little bit more natural, and that would be a mode I potentially would use. Again, if I don't need to actually focus on just anything else that's on screen with the user interface. If you don't need to look at the map or your health bar or anything like that, this could be an option for you. And last here we have the matte anti-glare coating. That's going to be a preference thing. Some people are going to say that it looks better and they prefer the matte look over the glossy. Some people are going to prefer glossy. It just really depends on your preference in regards to whether or not you like a certain visual look and then the room that you're in. So glossy just makes the colors pop more. I do like glossy panels in terms of the coating, but if you're in a room that has a lot of light, it's going to reflect that light. So you're going to get a lot of reflections off of that screen, and that can be distracting. So if you're in a room that has a lot of windows, for instance, I probably wouldn't get a glossy panel. I would go more with a matte. If you are in a room that's dark and you don't have that issue, then yeah, I would probably lean towards glossy, because again, it just makes everything pop a little bit more in regards to the colors. So that is going to wrap this video up. This one's a little bit trickier, I feel like, because I like the fact that this is on sale. I think it probably should be a lower price point though, because of what it's competing with that's out there. I would probably, unless I really just needed this 800R curve, I would probably lean towards other models that have newer OLED panels to avoid, one, the text fringing that this thing has, and two, to get the newer OLED care features that will just make this last even longer before you have any chance of burn-in. Now, if you don't care about the text fringing and you're not worried about having the newer OLED care features, and the difference in price to you isn't something where you're willing to pay the extra to get that newer panel, then this is going to still be a really good monitor, especially if you're really just going to be gaming on PC with this, because you're still getting all the amazing upside of an OLED here in terms of great visuals, really fast response time. You're getting the infinite black levels on top of a really clean aesthetic when it comes to the molding with this. You're getting the DTS audio, so you're getting really good audio through the headphone jack. You're getting all the mechanical adjustments. You're getting the HDMI 2.1, so you can do the uncompressed 240 hertz through that HDMI. You're also getting extra USB ports, and of course we get the 800R curve. So again, there is a lot to like here, but I would still encourage people to look at the price point here and then compare it to some other ones with similar specs that have these newer panels, and then go with the one that best suits you. So that's going to wrap this video up. I will have a link for this in the description if you want to pick it up. Definitely check back for sales. You may find this at a even cheaper price point here in the next couple of months. Hopefully, fingers crossed on that. If you have any questions about this that I didn't answer in this video, let me know in the comment section. I will make sure to answer that for you there. If you like the video, hit the like button for me, as it helps the channel out. If you want to continue to follow along with all my content, hit the subscribe button for me. And as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.